Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Don Brenninkmeijer, Chair of Built by Nature, and I'll be guiding you through today's event to formally launch our major new philanthropic initiative, a network and fund with a mission to accelerate the timber building transformation and a vision for a built environment that works in unison with nature. We're going to be hearing from some of the industry's frontrunners and Europe's thought leaders today, so let me give you a flavour of what's coming up. First up is Leslie Johnson, Chief Executive of Laudes Foundation. She will talk to us about Built by Nature's launch and its place in Laudes Foundation's portfolio of industry transformation initiatives. We then have two panel discussions that first will feature speakers from global real estate and investment group Lendlease, the EU's Climate Innovation Initiative, Climate Kick, and sustainable construction pioneer, Cree Buildings. And they'll be talking about the built environment's perspective on how we need to innovate and collaborate to accelerate the timber building transformation. In the second panel, speakers from the European Forest Institute, Bauhaus der Erde, and Stora Enso will be unpicking the science and practice of our building industry, working in unison with nature. Finally, we'll mark the launch of our accelerator fund and also share how you can get involved, either as a frontrunner team applying for a grant to establish solutions to scaling regenerative timber buildings, or by joining us as a co-funder. Before I hand over to Leslie, I'd first like to give a little background as to why we are launching Built by Nature and what role it will play in the transformation of the built environment. As we approach the critically important COP26, we've seen as many new commitments from business and governments as we have new scientific research that reinforces the stark reality of climate change. We need transformative solutions in every industry and every corner of the globe that tackle both deep emissions reductions and carbon removal at scale. We should see this also as an opportunity to build long-term support of innovation pathways, to ensure that new ways of financing and building are regenerative, inclusive and just, putting our environment at the climate at the heart of our decision-making. The built environment, which accounts for close to 40% of our emissions globally, urgently needs to address its carbon footprint, and in a way that works in unison with nature. I'm here at 6 Orsman Road, a beautiful hybrid timber building in East London by British Land and Waugh Thistleton Architects, designed for the Storey brand. It's a living example of a pioneering approach to design and construction and a fitting backdrop to today's event. It's estimated that a city the size of Paris is built every single week, with international building space expected to double globally before 2050. Emissions from industrial building materials threaten to consume our remaining carbon budget. Everyone here today has a vision and the ability to do something about it. In many cases, you are the front runners in enabling this change, breaking down barriers and transforming our industry bit by bit, day by day. We must reimagine the way we build from a carbon-intensive industry to one that helps to remove more carbon from the atmosphere than it adds. To achieve transformational change in the built environment, we need to dramatically increase the amount we build in timber, and we need to raise the bar to ensure we increase the impact of every metre squared, strengthening forests and reforestation as we transition the way we build our cities. Built by Nature is here to support this transition. Our mission is to accelerate the timber building transformation, radically reducing embodied carbon, safely storing carbon in our buildings for generations, and sequestering carbon by championing forest stewardship and regeneration, so that our built environment once again works in unison with nature. Our strategy is about working It relies on every leader in this arena to play their role and work together as teams to change paradigms and scale practical solutions. From the Bauhaus der Erde's leading research to the Cities for Forests team's forest partnerships, and from the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance work on local policies to Climate Kick's deep city demonstrations, not forgetting Cambridge University's leading material innovation research, we are already so lucky to have a team of A partners sitting alongside us, as well as a wide array of industry frontrunners who have joined our network at launch. Through our collective platform, we will focus on 3 activities. First, connecting frontrunners from industry and other stakeholders, so we become more than the sum of our parts. Secondly, enabling research and innovation as the foundation of the change, and removing limitations and embedding incentives in policy and legislation. And finally, amplifying new narratives to change mindsets about timber construction, first in Europe and then the world. Built by Nature's Accelerator Fund will be the fuel that propels an ecosystem of innovative solutions to emerge across this network, and will act as a vehicle to pull donor funds into this exciting climate solution. We cannot do this alone. The power of our network comes from you, the sector's thought leaders, co-funders, and industry partners. I would now like to introduce Leslie Johnson, Chief Executive of the Laudes Foundation, to hear about its commitment to providing philanthropic funding to accelerate the built environment's transition.
Thank you, Don. I'm delighted to be here today with our partners to mark the launch of our latest initiative, Built by Nature. And as many of you know, we at Laudes Foundation have been working hard to address what we see as a dual crisis of climate breakdown and deepening social inequality. We do this with and through business and industry because, as part of the larger Brenninkmeijer family enterprise, we're able to leverage over 6 generations of entrepreneurship. And in fact, I'm pleased to see so many colleagues from the DevCo, COFRA, and the family's investment offices here with us today. And while we believe that business can be a force for good, more needs to be done, particularly in the built environment, which, as Don mentioned, contributes a staggering 40% of all greenhouse gas emissions. So we need new industry transformation models to address this. And at Laudes, we love to create collaborative platforms which we can use to change what we hope is business as usual. We did it with Fashion for Good 5 years ago, which to this day continues to nurture innovations in the fashion supply chain, linking the market to innovators. And we want to do it with wood, with Built by Nature, an ambitious collaboration to accelerate our timber transformation journey. But I'm not here to talk about wood. You'll hear that later in the panels. I'm here to talk about finance. Because to reach net zero, we are going to need the largest reallocation of capital in human history. $90 trillion is needed by 2030 to adapt the world's infrastructure alone. And I believe that philanthropy has a unique role to play here. Philanthropy is society's risk capital, with the potential to enable innovation in ways that other parts of the system can't or won't. And that's what we're seeing in the built environment. It's a challenging sector, suffering, I think, from a bit of systems lock-in. There are few incentives to change the way we do things. In fact, price, not purpose, often drives decisions. And other challenges such as knowledge gaps, regulation, cost of insuring, make it complicated. And as long as traditional materials are cheap and available, and as long as carbon is not priced in, there is little incentive to change. The opportunity presented by Built by Nature needs a bit of a nudge. And that's where we at Laudes Foundation come in, and I hope others, both investors and philanthropic funders, will join us. Because as philanthropy, we can be catalytic. We can de-risk new models, we can address market failure, we can also fail, because that's when we learn, and I would hope, course correct. Later, my colleague James will announce Built by Nature's Accelerator Fund, which will provide grants to innovators to de-risk new approaches and reduce, I hope, that barrier caused by this fear of failure. But first, we as philanthropic funders need to act. Globally, less than 2% of all philanthropic funding goes into climate mitigation. And given that the built environment has an outsized impact on our climate, it's time to change that and welcome more funders to help us all build by nature. So thank you for being here and for joining us. And back to you, Don.
Thanks, Leslie, for outlining the important role that philanthropic capital must play in catalyzing innovation and impact. Right, up next, what innovation are we seeing from major players in Europe's built environment to tackle embodied carbon, contributing to net zero in a way that supports nature? That's the topic of our first panel discussion today. It's being chaired by James Drinkwater, the head of built environment at Laudes Foundation. And he's joined by three key industry figures. James, over to you.
Thank you very much, Don. We've got a fantastic panel discussion ahead. Two real industry frontrunners that are part of the Built by Nature network and one of our major partners. And it's my delight to be able to welcome them with us today. This panel is really going to look at the built and cities aspect of this story and look at how we can collaborate and innovate to drive the timber building transformation. I've got with us here today Hubert Romberg, CEO of the Romberg Group and founder of Cree Buildings, and we'll be hearing about the exciting work they're doing. Kirsten Dunlop, CEO of Climate Kick, the EU's climate innovation initiative, again doing some deep demonstration work in cities across the region. And Neil Martin, CEO of Europe at Lend-Lease, an international property and infrastructure company. You're all very welcome indeed. And if I may, I'll come to you first of all, Hubert. You're doing some really fascinating work with Cree Buildings. So I want to put that in the spotlight a little bit and hear how you're transforming the sector with what you do, how you're doing construction differently and why you're embracing timber buildings.
Thank you. Yes. I'm really happy about this movement, taking place now, and everything is like aware that we have to do stuff and change things, but then you start realizing that it's not that easy to have this change, because we changed too. Our group now is like a big construction group which now tries to do that change, although we started 10 years before. So it's a real total different approach to do construction. So it's not about changing just the material, it's changing the whole process and bringing much more efficiency and productivity in it, because otherwise, which we cannot change. And that brings me to the first argument. We have the peoples, we're the lack of skilled people in the whole industry. Who will do all these buildings, all this change? We have to think industrial and have an industrial approach, which is much easier done with timber. But my approach was to change it to timber because it has such a different impact on the planet. And that was part of our sustainability strategy. That's why we founded Cree as a company 10 years ago. Then we started off, we made a couple of projects. We built 8 Storey in 8 days. We showed the power, but then we found ourselves in this obstacles, in this, where's the knowledge? How's the coding? How's the administration? But we keep on going. And that's why we as Cree realized we will not be fast enough if we do a couple of building every year as a company. Yeah, it looks great, green projects and stuff. We said we had got to change. We got to go into a mood which is just dominated by trust and share. That's what we do. We built Cree as a platform, which now is a model like digital platforms where we share all the knowledges we have. We help now other construction companies, other developers, wherever they are in different countries, to take that know-how to the next level, to be sure what works, what's probably to be taken care of, And this is what makes it so powerful at the moment. We feel this demand for the know-how for that type of buildings, and it's thrusted in a good way by the European Union, with all the Green Deal and the recovery mission that pushes really a lot in that direction. And when you don't get real finance in 2 years from now, you will ask yourself and probably wake up what happened, because there's new regulations now. You need to have Article 8 or 9 products in real estate investments. If you cannot provide that, you have a problem in your business. And that's what a lot of developers and general contractors now realize. And now everyone is like on alert, but where's the know-how? How can we scale the know-how? And that's what we want to do, because not just because of making like a bigger company or more profit. It's just a mission from myself. How could I like multiply our impact? And that's exactly why I'm here. And I love to be on this panel, because you are really giving a good platform, bringing people together, like regulations, industry, and let people on the screen who really did it and know how to do it. Because let me tell you one thing, everyone tells you, oh, that's not possible. It's too complicated. We cannot do this. And then that's always when I'm usually invited, and we really have project with the biggest German wood structure project in Berlin with the Südkreuz. We have like a project in Japan, in Singapore, in Canada now, and all different codes. But we try to meet that with a certain setting standard, which is approved. People learn from each other. That's the way we want to smooth a little bit this standard discussion and make it possible all over the world and all over Europe. And that's why I'm happy that we have this platform approach where we really are not limited by resources. And on the other hand, we have the problem with the supply, because when this demand hits the market in 2 or 3 years by project designed today, someone has to produce it. Someone has to deliver it. So we have to have a look on certain investments in industrial production. And I have and then I will close this. I have an idea. We will have reduced production in car manufacturing and suppliers there. It will go down somehow. But they're the people from automation, from industrialization, probably construction industry will need, and probably we can shift a little bit of this very important European industry to that where we need it, to build more with timber, because that's the best carbon storage technology in the world, when you ask me.
It's a very exciting platform model that Chris put out there into the world, and indeed is starting to really connect all these dots. And it's fascinating to hear about that shift you see coming from mass manufactured cars to actually those skills being employed elsewhere. And Kirsten, if I could bring you in on joining the dots, really, because Climate Kick is doing this really at a huge level at the city and urban scale. I'd love to hear a little bit about some of the deep demonstrations you're doing in cities like Milan and Madrid, and how you're helping, again, those innovators like Hubert and Cree Buildings actually take new ways of doing things to scale. What are the dots we have to join? How are you doing it? What are the challenges?
Thank you very much, James. Yes, so we are, Climate Kick is a European organization funded in part by the European Institute of Innovation and Technology, and blending that sort of support together with support that we are extremely proud and pleased to be able to bring together with the Laudes Foundation. And our opportunity is to essentially catalyze and act on the learnings that we have had as an organization operating in the climate innovation development space and the climate innovation supply space for the last 10, nearly 12 years, where we have been very focused on developing new solutions and placing them into market, building the skills that you were describing, Hubert, educating people, re-educating them in terms of how to think differently and act differently, and working to bridge the relationship with industry, R&D development, with university technology transfer, and with the applications of innovations in specific contexts. And much of what we are doing now is really very much focused on taking the learnings we've had from 10, 12 years of doing that, and shifting, pivoting our focus, as you say, James, to very much in what I would describe as the implementation gap right in the middle, where we have a very, very significant distance between policy commitments that are being made at the level of whole cities, or even at the level of districts, at the level of regions, or at the level of nations, member states within a European context, and the world of solutions that are out there, that are available or ready to scale or becoming close to be ready if there is sufficient market signal, but also a whole wealth of earlier stage solutions that could be much more accelerated if they were given a context in which to operate and join up. And our observation has been that not addressing that messy middle space of implementation where we combine solutions, we pull together the multiple dimensions that we need to create systemic design and redesign, not only in materials use, as Hubert was saying, but in the broader picture, indeed, of whole building construction, a whole district design, of urban planning, of the interface between policy, procurement, planning, fiscal solutions, citizen engagement, and the opportunities to be thinking about, for example, the regeneration of the urban environment as something that is operating on multiple scales: regeneration of social and emotional well-being with the greening of urban spaces, and with the creation and construction of buildings that are inherently more intuitively connected to the natural world. Regreening or rehabilitation of the urban environment in such a way that cities become our allies in restoring the planet to a more sustainable place and to reducing emissions. So Climate Kick acts to orchestrate those connections, to make connections and bridges between the providers of solutions, between entrepreneurs with new kind of edgy elements that could make an exponential difference in combination with other most mainstream solutions, to bridge in some of the questions that are missing around information, data, digital instruments, or the setup of planning and procedural requirements that begin to take on much more holistic perspectives, like whole of life carbon perspectives, instead of looking in individual sectors and sites. So our work is to act as both a supplier of innovation, an organization seeking to source innovations that could be relevant, as a connector of different pieces of the puzzle, and as an organization holding the orchestration space of interrogating innovation actions and the experimentation and exploration of using new solutions and putting them in place in cities like Milan and Madrid, where we are proud to be partnered with Laudes and Built by Nature, and looking at what do we learn from those implementations and from the opportunity to test and push the boundaries of where policy is not ready, where technology is ready but not able to scale outwards, where logistics and supply chains are not yet fully connected up, or where there's a missing gap in terms of public imagination to understand the breadth of what's possible and the extent to which this is an opportunity to create visions, livable visions for well-being that have a completely different sense of possibility and hope and hopefulness and optimism when it comes to facing into climate change. So we act as an innovation agency, an innovation platform. Specifically and concretely, we have named this kind of work deep demonstrations, partnering with city governments and partnering with the administrative elements of a city's organizational and industrial structure, and with the businesses that are involved around that, whether owned by public authorities or partially owned or private, and pulling in then elements around education, entrepreneurship, innovation application. And we've called it deep demonstrations because we can see one of the single greatest limiting factors is a failure of imagination, the challenge of getting from individual sites, building sites, or individual district transformations to the sense of possibility that an entire city can decarbonize in this way, that an entire city can move to a regenerative footing, and that kind of unleashing a sense of real possibility in literally showing what's possible and making it something that it can be felt, something that we can walked through, is one of the things that we believe is most urgently needed to unlock a lot of the flows of capital and the flows of policy and regulatory change that we're supporting through sandboxing approaches and so on. So it's very much about learning by doing and facilitating the environment for learning by doing at scale.
Fantastic. Well, with that, the imagination we've got on this panel and indeed the skill sets that you're bringing to bear, I certainly am very hopeful myself that we can scale up some of this great work to build in a more regenerative way. But coming to you, Neil, I'm interested to hear a little bit about how Lend-Lease is tackling climate, its impact, and particularly embodied carbon emissions. And I'd love to hear your reflections on that and why that's turned you on as a company to timber.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me and onto the panel. It's interesting listening to the other speakers. I think it's important to get the context right, and then perhaps I can actually pick on examples of what we've done. So the context for me is the built environment, is a big contributor to global emissions. It's about 40%, and therefore I think the built environment has a responsibility, if it's a big part of the problem, to be a big part of the solution. So then needs to set out on a roadmap, which is trying to be, target, I should say, of absolute zero by 2030. So we've got a way to go. And we've made some progress on scope 1 and scope 2 with replacing fuels and green leases. But the challenge will really be the embodied carbon element. And that leads you into thinking about how do you tackle that. And then by definition, you think about timber. Why do you think about timber? Well, we know replacing 1 ton of steel or concrete with timber saves about 1.5 tons of embodied carbon. So the maths are quite simple at that level to think through. So we've tried to look at how we embrace timber, and I'll give you 2 examples of where we're actually deploying that thinking. So one thing is having a plan and understanding it, but I think in the end, the industry has to start delivering. So, here in London, we've just completed a building called Pavilion. It's about 18,000 square feet, and the building is entirely built out of timber or CLT and glulam beams. The reason I pick on that is because it's a restaurant type event, but more importantly, the outturn of the building benchmarked against the London Energy Transformation Initiative, which is a benchmark. It's better than their best practice. So it shows you can build these buildings and deliver these buildings and hopefully try to match and not beat the benchmark. So that's an opportunity in London. If you're ever down at IQL, I'd suggest you go and have a look. Fantastic food, but you can see what is the art of the possible. And then if I think about, okay, that's one building, but how do you make it across your platform? So of course you always have to take the first step. We announced about 10 days ago a global partnership with Storenzo. So this is trying to get us as a business now to really scale up. And I think that was one of the comments that was made earlier about how do you scale it up. So we've got this partnership with them. We're rolling it out. Our first job is a job called Mind in Italy. It's on the old Expo site. So it's a vast site, Expo in Milan. And we're looking at how we roll that out. We've formed a JV, it's called Podium MX, where we will look at how you use timber in new design and new products, and then we'll roll it out across our site, but we'll tie in the supply chain. That's the trick. So it's all right having a design and a product, but you've got to tie the supply chain. So we're linking the supply chain into that. Our target is basically to, 50% lower embodied carbon as benchmarked against the RICS embodied carbon benchmark. So that's our target. And we're working hard on that. So over the next few years, hopefully you'll see a lot more of that sort of product coming out across our portfolio. But I think in the end, being in the built environment, it's a duty and it's an obligation that we actually start, looking at how you deploy some of these techniques. So I think a lot of the thinking's there. But in the end, you've got to take those first steps and you've got to start rolling out, examples of how you can get this out. And that's why I pick on those 2, because I think it shows, we are making steps. By the way, we haven't got all the answers, and I'm sure we'll make missteps and get it wrong. And that's why I like these panels, because it's not just about what we do, it's about what others do. And sharing and learning, that is the only way that the built environment, I think, will make significant strides, is by sharing that best practice, sharing those knowledges, and sharing the learnings. And I think that's the challenge for us as an industry.
And I can hear we share a similar philosophy in that regard. And indeed, this coming together of the skill sets of the enterprises we can hear on the call today, I think is exactly what Built by Nature is about. Maybe we could even be doing something exciting in Milan. And I want to come back to you, Hubert, to that, that point about we don't have all the answers. But I'm interested when it comes to really optimizing the way we build with wood for the climate. And in terms of joining industry with forestry, and the kind of forestry that is really great for the climate. How far have we come? How far have we still to go? I'm interested where we're at from your perspective, and where are the challenges?
I think there are a few main questions we have to address always in every conversation. First, how about fire resistance? Okay, that's a long story. Everyone knows now. it's safer to be in a mass wood or in a wooden structure building than being in a steel building, whatever. So I think we have gone a way which is, it's on the right way. So the facts are here, science is there, experiences are there. The second thing is there enough wood? You know, when we talk about sustainability, everyone sees down, oh, we are cutting down all the existing woods to make buildings. Okay, that's very important to have this conversation, to say, with all the wood we regrowing every year, we could do with 1/3 of this, we can do all the housing in Germany or in Austria and in the countries. I mean, it's so much wood here, and it would be much of value, and it would be much valuable or worthy to make a sustainable forestry, because you have a really high-end product by doing this carbon storage in buildings, you know. So it's the best way to use wood. So that's an issue we have to address. It's not a problem. What we see is the sharing is so important, we just heard, because our industry is totally regional. I mean, the developers are local, construction companies are local, so it's all distributed and fragmented. It's not just fragmented, it's geographically not connected, okay, that this type of product. That's why we always think about as CRE as a product, you know, that's, you know, you get a building which is Article 9, which is recyclable, it's circular, you have a minus carbon calculations out of the digital twin. We have all the data, so that's so important. If you have the data, you can have information on every part which is in the building on the very beginning. And then you know exactly what parts are in there, what are the in it, what's the gray energy in it, how much does it cost, who can deliver it, when does it has to be on site. That's important now, because from that on, you can organize the whole site in a different way, because you go off-site, prefab. So you go in an industrial way by using this digital knowledge. And so sharing is easy if you are in a planning state. Okay, we share now designs all over the world. Yeah, but that's not enough, because you have to share much more. What we are doing is we have a software using gaming engine, Unity gaming engine, where we do the whole assembly process. You can go in a virtual reality, you have your project, your BIM model, and then you can do everything in advance with all the partners before you go to the site. So you can go through in a virtual way and optimize the whole process, including how much space do I need? Is there a crane? What is it? And just imagine the power, how powerful that is, because we can share that all over the world too. You know, if you build a CRE building, for instance, you get all this information in addition, not just what material you use or where the next Storey Enso probably supplier would be, or whatever, whoever partners you in this whole network. If we put all our know-how and possibilities and supply chains together and have strong partners like Lend-Lease, for instance, or others, they really make an impact, because they do so many things. So they can scale in their own organizations. And if some of such scaling, innovative, first movers, front-running organizations work together, we can really make a difference. So this is very, very important to understand. It's not just about pushing the information for designs the best. It's like going into the whole value chain, supply chain. We share knowledge about production. Our Portuguese partner, they are interested to build up a production. We know how to produce because we do it here. So why we don't share all the know-how to help them producing it locally? So we have to think on every supply chain, not just on a design level. That's very dangerous to stay there.
Mm-hmm. And I'm interested, Kirsten, if I can bring you in on this idea of, well, how are we managing to collaborate and scale across different places? Because you're working in so many different cities, and that I think is a very hopeful vision Hubert's presented of how we can scale, how we create these blueprints, these platforms. But what's stopping this scaling? Because certainly, timber, bio-based materials, circularity, these things are hitting roadblocks. So where are the challenges that you're seeing emerge?
Certainly. So I was just kind of thinking along the same lines as listening to Hubert. So certainly I would say standardization of information, standardization of decision support and tools, the quality of digital tools which are potentially available, not actually available in practice or not being applied in practice, certainly skills. And here it's not, I mean, there's a question of skills within the industry itself, But my perception is, from our perspective, the critical question here is the skills and capabilities and mindsets in public administration, in the procurement side, in the planning side, in the forward look, on thinking about global supply chains or regional, local supply chains, making potentially with the possibility of making a virtue out of a very distributed system because it's actually more resilient. But at the moment, that there is no virtue in what is effectively fragmentation. And without the standardization of policies, practices, information, tools of reference, and even language of reference, it's incredibly difficult to work to use that decentralized structure to think at scale of whether we have sufficient biomass available, how to prepare it, how to nurture it, how to distribute it and make available, but also how to think then scaling downwards and outwards what is needed and what is context specific and real and relevant for every environment. And that's where those skills and capabilities are urgently needed. So from our perspective, there is a real issue around identifying early where existing policy and regulation is getting in the way and structuring the kind of environment that is conducive to experimentation and exploration quickly, not only in kind of single, small, individual sort of what I would call the bright, shiny thing solutions, but really where you hit the kind of the bigger orders of how to combine the possibility of, say, 200 cities seeking to procure in the same way or asking for supply lines to come across. And we now have, with the European Green Deal, with the Net Zeros project that Built by Nature is now connecting into, a real policy platform opportunity to procure or to create the conditions for procurement at that scale. But we do not have any of the information architecture or even the supply side and demand side architecture to actually marry it all up and pull it through. So there's a huge need there. There's a huge need, I think, in terms of the way in which the language used across different digital tools. It doesn't help that in Europe you've got member states operating with very, very different sets of references on what's possible or what's relevant. And I think that is potentially relatively easily solvable, except for this much, much more complex problem of social and cultural identities and the realities of how people interpret something into what they feel is meaningful or respectful or reflective of their own identities and their own sense of priorities. So one of the other areas that we're particularly interested in looking at is how do we bring together the technical question of embodied carbon, of thinking in terms of whole life carbon, questions that appeal to and are understood by engineers, understood potentially by urban planners, obviously understood by industry seeking to innovate across the whole. How do we marry that up with a sense of grounded local reality in what people aspire to live in, understand the value of, understand the purpose of finance being directed towards, and see a meaningful connection with their own sense of urban identity or their sense of community structures or their sense of what is needed over different life stages. And that then comes to how do we leverage, for example, in a European context, the notion of the new European Bauhaus to bring together cultural and aesthetic narratives into the discourse of timber and construction, of rethinking cities to create regenerative environments so that we create, it sounds like the less urgent soft side, but from our perspective, it's probably the most urgent side of creating a pull through, a demand in terms of social and cultural tipping points for change that really pull through the demand for technical solutions to speed up, for digital tools for policy and planning, to find ways to make available to more people and to more communities the choices that they then have a sense of wanting to ask for. So I think it's a combination of that, the glue that really joins together supply, demand, and the enabling frameworks to pull it forward, but really also the social and cultural and civic imagination that is required to create a leap, a real kind of exponential leap change in what we're doing.
And I love that description of glue, this network that is holding us all together, and all these brilliant efforts needs to ensure that we become more connected over time. And it'll be great to hear from our colleagues from the Bauhaus der Erde a little bit later on in the event around some of those challenges. And I want to come back, Neil, to you. around some of the problems that, say, you're experiencing in markets like the UK? Because I heard from Hubert, some of Cree Building's home markets are really kind of going for this. But I'm interested, what are some of the barriers that this agenda is hitting? I certainly hear that insurance has become a big issue in markets like the UK, and the regulatory debate perhaps is going the wrong way on timber.
Yeah, look, I think it's interesting. I was listening to what Kirsten was saying, and I think, the question in my mind is, there's always barriers to anything, right? There are always challenges, and I think one of those challenges certainly is the regulatory environment. How do you encourage use of new products? And of course, the UK is looking very closely at its safety legislation and what it means to have a safe building, and quite rightly so. But that also needs to make sure that we pick up the idea of how do you embrace new products and innovate if we as a country here in the UK are to hit our ambitious targets that, being talked about this week at the Global Investment Summit. And clearly insurers play a role in that, banks play a role in mortgages. And so you do have to create that environment. And I think part of that environment can be shaped by industry coming together, whether that's a glue or the knot. But I think part of it is the industry coming together with ideas and solutions, and with evidence that backs up how do you need to change the regulations in order to enable new products and new innovation. So I think it's a bit like industry has to come up with, we've got a great idea, we can show that it's satisfies different specs and different requirements, but we need the environment to be accommodating to us to roll this out. I think that's one area that we as an industry need to work much harder on, bringing the solutions and asking thereafter for regulatory change. I get there's a view that sometimes we're always first to look at others. So my view is we should go first. I think the other point that Hubert was making was interesting as well about the supply chain. I actually, have a slightly nuanced view on this. Historically, we design buildings from the top, and then we get suppliers to try to fit their products in, right? My view is, well, that's been good for a couple of thousand of years, but isn't it better that we try a different way? And I think the challenge going forward is how you link digital up with the supply chain, because we need their products, their innovations, and then we design buildings that fit those products. I think that's a massive opportunity, and we're doing a lot with our Podium software to try to pull that together. So that's Storenzo, one of the examples. How do you work with their products, right? What are their products? What are their innovations? And then how can we design a building with their products? Historically, we've sort of done it the other way around. And it's been great, right? Don't get me wrong, but I just think there's a bit of a cultural shift and a mindset shift to get that. So, yeah, there are barriers. There's barriers to everything, right? And I just think sometimes we've just got to, confront those and come up with solutions. I think it's easy to find barriers, more challenging to find solutions.
And I think that's a fantastic call to action. This is exactly why we are all together today, launching this joint venture to actually say, we really have a huge capacity to simply innovate, bring together the teams, bring together the solutions we need to go as far and as fast as we can, and work with the Climate Kicks and their city networks, work with other partners like the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance to actually start to scale whenever we hit those barriers, to educate. And again, as you said, put the solutions first and bring others with us on the journey. I'd like to thank you all for a fantastic panel. I think that endpoint around the mindset shift, thinking forest first, as we actually start to look at a new regenerative form of building, is such a fantastic point to end on. Thank you, one and all. Now back to you, Don.
Thanks, James. Truly inspiring. We are so delighted to have Lendlease, Cree Buildings and the Romberg Group as committed industry frontrunner partners, as well as to be working closely with Climate Kick on the Madrid and Milan city-scale development projects we just heard Kirsten talk about. Next, let's unpick the science and practice of how we can accelerate the timber building transformation in a way that benefits nature. This is what our second panel will be exploring. And once again, it's being moderated by James, who has an equally impressive new group of leaders to talk to. James, over to you.
Thanks, Don. So it's time now to turn to our esteemed panel of leading thinkers to discuss nature. Leading thinkers, research institutes, and forestry experts are joining here, and we'll be exploring the science and the practice of how this timber building transformation can take place really with nature at its heart and strengthen the role that our forests are playing in averting the climate crisis. I'm very pleased to have an esteemed panel here. They need no introduction, but I will give a brief introduction. Firstly, Professor John Schnellenhuber, one of the world's foremost climate scientists, and here as founder of the Bauhaus der Erde, one of the catalysts and inspiration for the European Bauhaus Initiative. Mark Palachi, director of the European Forest Institute and a leading thinker and doer within the circular bioeconomy, and Annika Bresky, CEO at Storey, a global leading provider of renewable solutions in packaging, biomaterials, and wooden construction. So firstly, coming to you, John, I'm very interested to hear a little bit about some of the research that has inspired Bauhaus der Erde's vision and mission. You're really one of the leading institutes that's grappling with how do we bring these forces of cities and forests together to create win-win. So I'd like to come to you first of all to hear a big picture overview of some of the fantastic work that you're leading in this space.
Okay, thank you, James. I may first give you the mega picture and then the giga picture, if you like. So I start with the really big picture, only to trump it later on. You see, I have been a long-standing member of the IPCC, and you know, the Paris Agreement is the reference point for everything when we talk about climate stabilization. And the aim is, of course, to keep global warming at about 1.5 degrees. It will be very hard to achieve. If you look into the IPCC reports, you see that this can only be achieved if we have big negative emissions, as they are called. You have to remove carbon from the atmosphere, actually, apart from, and that goes without saying, coming to zero emissions by 2050, probably earlier, 2040. But if you look into the portfolio of proposals by the IPCC, what can we do in order to achieve negative emissions? You find very little which is convincing. There's a lot about BECCS, bioenergy with carbon capture and sequestration, things like that. But the really obvious solution, namely, using timber construction as a way to store and tuck away carbon, which comes from the atmosphere in the end after being drawn down by photosynthesis, and adding a lot of economic value by using this timber. This sort of perfect natural solution is more or less overlooked and not really recognized by the IPCC. And I was really annoyed by that, so started 10 years ago to think about it in the sense of the slogan is reforest the planet, retimber the city. That's more or less telling you the whole story. So we finally did a number of in-depth analyses published in Nature Sustainability, for example, buildings as a global carbon sink, in order to demonstrate, first of all, the doability, the feasibility of the whole approach, but second, at what scale can we really achieve this? And it turned out, to our own surprise, it's really substantial. So you can probably tuck away half of the carbon budget left for humanity in order to be in line with the Paris Agreement, and tuck it away with timber construction. And this was overwhelmingly convincing that we have to go into that field. Maybe the giga picture, just a short comment on that. In a way, we would play the Carboniferous drawdown story again, 300 million ago, when the fossil fuel resources were formed in the Carboniferous age. The biosphere really was drawing down lots of carbon from the atmosphere, actually such an amount that our planet narrowly escaped a new complete snowball Earth episode, because I think ppm in the end in the atmosphere was only 100 or something, far below the pre-industrial level we have seen in the 17th century or something. And in a way, we would, in an artificial, constructive way, replay the Carboniferous episode by drawing down CO2 from the atmosphere through photosynthesis. But we, as constructors, would sequester the carbon. So it would be, in a way, the biggest story of all on Earth. We would replay it by timber construction. And this is not only important for saving the world, it's only a fascinating story.
Fantastic, and it's wonderful to see some of the emerging that Bauhaus is really leading on this agenda. And coming to you, Mark, next, I'm interested to hear about the EFI's vision for a circular bioeconomy and what that means in the broadest sense, and also what you see as the role of construction within that. So tell us a little bit about how your institute is really leading the charge on this.
Thank you, James. Let me start with the problem. I think after relying for more than 100 years on a linear and fossil-based economy, it is quite clear that we have reached a tipping point. Our world has become too big for our planet. And in fact, the climate, the biodiversity crisis, even the pandemic are not separate crises. They are just different consequences of the same fundamental problem, which is our economic system. Remember, a system that is addicted to fossil resources, to growth at all costs, and that has failed to value our most important capital and the main basis for human health, which is nature. So I think after arriving to such tipping point, we need a new way of thinking as basis for a new economic paradigm. And in a broad sense, I believe personally that we need a new economy where life and not consumption becomes its true engine and purpose, what some of us call the circular bioeconomy. Because the circular bioeconomy, at the end of the day, is an economy powered by nature that prospers in harmony with nature. It is about investing in nature as the true engine of our economy. So remember that the circular bioeconomy, as we define it at DFI, aims at producing in a synergistic way food, energy, and bio-based solutions to decarbonize our economy while restoring natural capital and creating new jobs and prosperity. But the circular bioeconomy also, we believe it can have a very important catalytic effect, because at the end is an opportunity to rethink in a holistic way our land, food, energy, and urban systems. To start using natural principles, green infrastructures instead of gray infrastructures, bio-based solutions instead of fossil non-renewable solutions. And why this concept is so powerful? Because basically biological resources, and remember that bio means life, biological resources, if managed sustainably, are renewable and circular by nature. And the good news today is that we have really the technology, the science, as the professor has mentioned before, to really put forward this new economy. And the case of timber construction is quite clear. Remember that wood is the only significant construction material that is renewable and can be grown sustainably within a human scale. And at the same time, wood is probably the most effective way we have to reduce the carbon footprint of our cities, because you are not only replacing carbon-intense materials like fossil, like steel and concrete, but de facto you are storing carbon. So it's a perfect solution. You with timber construction, you can transform our cities into carbon storage infrastructures.
Fantastic, and that's an exciting vision, and I think a new way of really looking at the infrastructure that we need to move forward. Mark, thank you. And Annika, we've heard these terms, renewable and regenerative bioeconomy. Your company now has a goal to provide 100% regenerative solutions longer term. So can you tell us a little bit about what that really means and how the company is looking to get there in terms of wood construction solutions?
Well, thank you very much. And as said before, I'm very happy to hear the conversation that we're having in this team. I represent Stora Enso, and I want to give you just a background to who we are and what we are doing in this space. So Stora Enso is the renewable materials company. And our whole innovation agenda is based on replacing fossil-based materials wherever possible with wood-based materials, renewable materials, because as we heard before, they grow back if the forests are managed in a sustainable way. And here I can say Stora Enso is one of the largest private forest owners in the world. We have been managing forests for centuries in the Nordics. We never harvest more than the growth, often harvesting less than the growth in our forests. And this is exactly what was spoken before, that you can use that as an opportunity to create a carbon sink in the forest, but also growing, taking the solutions and the materials to produce carbon sinks in our society by, for instance, construction. So the areas where we are active is in packaging, in construction, in textiles, even battery parts, just to mention a few. And I feel very proud that I'm part of an industry that can really make a difference in mitigating climate change and support the transition in our societies towards this green bioeconomy. And the construction industry is actually one of the biggest impactors globally in terms of emission. And also in terms of opportunities. The European construction market size alone was last year estimated to be 1.7 trillion euro. And the US market size is nearly as big. And if we look now what is ahead of us, there is an expected annual growth of the global building stock of 2 billion square meters. So this is quite a lot. And at the same time, the construction sector is responsible for almost 40% of global carbon emissions. And so we are really key here in actually creating an opportunity for transitioning our societies in the construction space. And this is at a time when actually, as heard before, our planet cannot afford to absorb more emissions. So imagine then if we can build with as much wood as possible, we could store up to 500 million tons of CO2 annually. And that is actually twice the annual emissions of France. So I think this is an opportunity, as said, that is overlooked. And the world needs this new approach to materials. And wood can really transform construction section in this field. Naturally, not all parts of a building can be built by wood, but we for sure can find more efficient solutions for low carbon construction. So to ensure that we do this in a regenerative approach, I think it's crucial to make sure that we have climate change, biodiversity, positive and circular at top of mind when creating these solutions. And that is what we target with our sustainability agenda.
Fantastic, Annika. And we'll come back, I think, to a number of the points that you raise. And I'd like to, some of the figures here are extraordinary. The potential of this is clear, and I think the vision is compelling. But just in terms of sparking a little bit of discussion now, and I firstly come to you, Don, we're embracing a lot of complexity here. And obviously your institute, the Bauhaus der Erde, will be leading some of the fundamental and applied research in this space. So I'm interested, as you're hosting dialogue within the scientific community, what are some of the knowns and unknowns here that we're grappling with, and where actually do we need to really be commissioning further research in this area?
Yeah, first of all, I should explain why we used this title Bauhaus der Erde, which is in German, but I think everybody understands it. Bauhaus refers to the original Bauhaus, which was founded in 1919, almost 100 years ago, or a little bit more than 100 years ago, by Walter Gropius and others. And the idea was, you talk about complexity, to bring together actually all the knowledge and all the creativity in a transdisciplinary way. Yeah? So this was already 100 years ago, but people talked about a holistic approach to the built environment. And of course, with the means of that time, so concrete was used, steel was used, and so on, industrial production, pre-manufacturing, all these things. But if we would do a little Gedanken experiment, if Gropius and his comrades would be reborn and re-educated now and look around in the world, they of course would endorse bio-based construction immediately, yeah? And they would actually come up with solutions like timber construction at scale, things like that. This simply means Bauhaus for the planet, if you like. Now, I should also say I have been trained as a complexity scientist, and I applied these insights, how dynamical systems operate, for 40 years, more or less. And in a way, we are now well equipped with knowledge about dynamical systems we didn't have 50 years ago, things like that. So I think it's time now to put all the pieces in the jigsaw puzzle about the bioeconomy in the end, what Mark said, what Annika said, together, because in a way we are seeing a new age now, I think, in human civilization. We are overcoming the age of mineral resources, call it Iron Age, whatever, and we are entering the age which is defined by just two things, namely bio-based materials, natural solutions, and digitalization. I sometimes call it no tech, namely nature, meets high tech, namely artificial intelligence, or you could say nature meets intellect. These two pillars, natural solution and extremely subtle knowledge tools, so to speak, intellectual approaches, will define the new age. And I think it will be the age where our civilization has a chance to survive the next 10,000 years or even more.
It's a message and a ray of hope indeed. And coming to you, Annika, I want to dig a little bit deeper on one of these dynamics that people are often talking about. How do we, as we're aggregating demand, actors like Lend-Lease are saying we want to scale up timber in our construction pipeline. What does this mean on the supply side? Where are some of the challenges, and really what does this partnership with Lend-Lease mean for Stora Enso?
Well, I think no one can solve the issues alone. It is an ecosystem partnership. And that's why I'm so excited with this partnership that we have formed with Lend-Lease, because we are two strong global leading companies where we join forces with our joint capabilities, our competence in the material solutions that we can provide, the components that can be used, and then Lend-Lease competencies in construction and the ambition together to be forerunners in this field. So what we can do together is, for instance, when you make a digital twin of your building, you can immediately calculate the carbon footprint that it's going to have. And by smart choices of resources, you can make sure that your building is constructed in the most resource efficient way with the lowest carbon footprint as possible. We can do this globally. And it is about shifting the mindset of designers, architects into this new direction, and also by supporting governments that have a huge kind of impact on how the allocation of construction means are put on for city developments, for instance, and drive that transition, because we truly have to accelerate. The pace is not quick enough, as we are all aware. And by having this strong partnership in the ecosystem, I believe that's how you can drive systemic change. And many countries like France, for instance, they have pledged that they want to reduce the carbon footprint from construction and increase building with wood by 45% until 2030. Finland is doing the same with public buildings. And here we can truly be strong partners in these discussions with cities and governments that have ambitious targets.
I think that's such a key message. Partnership, collaboration is critical if we want to achieve really systemic change. Indeed, Rome wasn't built in a day. But Mark, I think actually some very interesting things are being built in Rome by your institute to help tackle this systemic change. So it'd be great to hear a little bit about how, again, you're actually moving this agenda forwards at the EFI.
Yes, right. We are opening this next year in an office in Rome that will be hosting the EFI BioCities facility, because we believe, as Professor Schoenhuber has mentioned, that we are now in a time of really radical changes, and nature needs to inspire the future of our cities. So with this BioCities facility, we would like to stimulate a paradigmatic shift in the way our cities are being planned and built, using biomaterials and green infrastructure as the urban fabric for the 21st century. So basically, with this office, we would like to stimulate a science-informed dialogue between urban planners, mayors, architects, foresters, medicine also, because we believe that forest trees play an important role in human health. So basically, the basis for our office is that we have the belief that forest, trees, and wood should become the backbone of the cities of the 21st century. And we would like to provide the science to realize such vision. So we count on all of you to join forces on that direction.
Wonderful. Very exciting to hear this fabulous network of solutions and indeed a network of networks of solution providers really emerging across the region. And can I come back, Annika, to you for a moment on the biodiversity issue specifically? And we've talked about climate, and I think in policy terms and in the built environment, climate has become the real driving concern. But I'm interested in, you touched a bit on biodiversity, how we're ensuring, again, we're looking at both the climate and biodiversity crisis as we really embrace this new era of city building with wood.
And I want to wind it back a little bit and talk about that there is a systemic change needed in many aspects that, for instance, the planetary boundaries, there are 9 planetary boundaries. If we exceed those, we cause irreversible changes to nature. And for Stora Enso, we have set targets to be, by 2050, 100% regenerative. And what does that mean? Well, it means that it's no longer enough to just cause less harm. You also have to restore and improve already existing, for instance, biodiversity matters, or improve your circularity, or make sure that your products and solutions and how we manage our forests are positive from climate mitigation and store carbon, and not only be net zero, but actually carbon positive. So these 3 parameters are key for us. And if we stay at biodiversity for one moment, a science-based approach is crucial. We work with biodiversity indicators for species and ecosystems. We have defined 17 of those indicators where we track and trace the development over the years. Because, we plant a tree today, and we harvest it after 70 years. So what we do today has a huge impact on what type of forests we have for the future. But by tracking and tracing, being transparent with the KPIs on biodiversity, being audited by external stakeholders on the type of standards that we use, that's how we also progress. And if I compare, for instance, Sweden and Finland now and 100 years ago, there is double amount of the forest than we had 100 years ago. So we're constantly learning and improving our practices here. And in terms of biodiversity loss, that is an impact really not only happening in the forest, but actually human activity, building cities, building infrastructure, using land for agriculture. So the whole land use perspective is important. But we are working within the area where we can impact, and that is how we manage the forests. And I love the term reforestation. That we see that should happen in more countries in Europe, and we're moving in the right direction.
And it's great indeed to see that we are moving in the right direction, and we have the right team, I think, at the table to continue heading in that direction. John, to come back to you, in terms of actually the next steps for the Bauhaus der Erde, I'm interested particularly in how you'll be engaging in the policy debate at European level and where you see that debate going. Obviously, your institute's been the catalyst for this European Bauhaus initiative, and it's fantastic to see that vision of a sustainable built environment being embraced. But what do you see as some of the key policy challenges and incentives we need moving forwards?
Yeah. No, in a way, we are all talking about an idea whose time has come. Otherwise, it would not have been possible to sort of ignite this debate at various political levels. So, in a way, we are dealing with a very mature issue now. But you nevertheless needed to say the right words in order to entice the various communities to join forces. Now, of course, I was very happy when we first started with Bauhaus der Erde as a not-for-profit company in Germany and having the support of the Laudes Foundation. Of course, immediately we started a big debate in Germany among the architects, for example, the urban planners, the designers, and so on. But when we had a chance actually to interact directly with the European Commission, in particular with the President, Ursula von der Leyen, and she took this theme up and actually disseminated in her State of the European Union speech, September last year. And this has created a hurricane of responses and an explosion of interest and debates, even controversies. But it simply, in a way demonstrated that, our civilization is ready now and prepared to rethink the built environment in general as part, as Mark said and Annika said, as a bio-based circular economy. This is the next big step. Now, what is going to happen? I mean, at the European level, we have a high-level roundtable of leading experts and architects, including people from other continents like Shigeru Ban, a famous architect who has built many things from actually paper and timber and so on. There will be probably end of this year a high-level conference, I guess in Finland, about the right European forest strategy, very, very important. We will have a global event probably in Rome next year, including Ursula von der Leyen. And the most important thing is that this European initiative in the end goes global, because the war against climate change will not be won or lost in Europe, although Europe can introduce a lot of innovations and initiatives. The war will be won or lost on other continents, in particular Africa, Latin America, Asia, and so on. That is, by the way, which I would like to add to what Annika said. And when you asked James about biodiversity, I mean, many people, including environmental organizations, I think in this context, are barking up the wrong tree. I mean, a managed forest, say in Finland or Slovenia or Germany, we already have very good practices in order to help that biodiversity is thriving. But what about the sheer destruction of primary forests on other continents, in the Congo Basin, in Kalimantan, in the Amazon, and so on? This needs to be stopped immediately. That is where we should put our political effort. And this should be also part of our trading policy in the future. So let's stop the destruction of primary forest all over the world, and let's try to manage our own forests within the planetary boundaries. That is a very clear recipe, I think.
And a very clear message, John. And perhaps I'll come to our other two speakers for closing thoughts now. As John said, we can blaze a trail in Europe, but actually really how this scales on the global stage is of critical importance. So perhaps coming to Mark first of all for thoughts on how what we're doing in Europe can really connect into a broader global agenda, and then to Annika. Mark.
Yeah, well, this is crucial, as Professor Schellhuber mentioned, because just look at Africa. Africa will need to provide housing for 1 billion people from now to 2050. Africa as a continent is harvesting more than 50% more than the EU countries together. But what is happening is that 90% of that wood is going for low efficient energy. So we need to help Africa to diversify renewable energy sources and use that wood in a more efficient way, higher economic value, and also more climate effective. Like timber construction would be a crucial issue. And this is one of the things we want to do from the office in Rome also, to build capacities in other continents that are urgently needed to make this transition towards a circular bioeconomy. And I think a general reflection from my side is that nowadays I see that many policymakers, also many sectors, see forest as a tool to compensate for a broken economic system. While I believe that we should see forest as a tool to transform our economic system. And there is a big difference. And I think this is a very important task. And this connects to timber construction. It's a way to rethink and transform our cities. I think we all need to work hard to do that because, sometimes many people see forest as a shortcut, not to do their homework. Let's remember that the problem is the fossil-based economy. That should be the focus. So we need to see forests as a complex long-term system, and therefore short-term political cycles are very challenging, as Annika mentioned and Professor Schellhuber mentioned, So let's understand forests as a complex system, and let's not make them complicated, because these are two different things. Complex systems sometimes are easy to understand if we don't make them complicated with the wrong policies or the wrong decisions. So that will be my, let's say, final reflections.
Thank you, Mark. And Annika, coming to you, if we look at actually what's scaling this groundswell of support for this agenda in Europe, this window of political opportunity to get it right and not overcomplicate, as Mark says, I'm interested how this can spin off and really impact a broader global debate from your perspective.
Well, I think we have to look at the forest from the local conditions. You have to have policies that are adapted to the local state that you have of a country's forest. The conditions are very different in a Nordic forest compared to a Southern European forest, compared to Latin American forests. So localized approaches for the maturity, also taking into account the maturity of forest management is key. And we've heard here that deforestation that is going on in many parts of the world, that is not what's happening, for instance, in the Nordics, and we shouldn't confuse those two things. So having a long-term view of hundreds of years, like we have had with our forest management, that we do it sustainably, that it is certified, that we constantly work on improving biodiversity, that we never harvest more than the growth. Make sure that you create jobs in local communities, that you are long-term financially sustainable and also environmentally sustainable. And here the key word is for all businesses that we have to become regenerative, all of our businesses, and we have to make sure that we break the dependency on fossil-based materials, because that is what needs to happen. So choosing the right materials for the right applications, using digital technology. And I didn't mention before, you can have a digital twin of a whole forest where you can with data manage your forest in the best possible way, making sure that you take the local approach in how forests are managed and use benchmarks, but learn. And then at the end, it is a systemic approach. We have to look at the full picture, both how we use biomaterial and how we have sustainable forest management, and those can be combined. It's not either or.
Wonderful. Annika, thank you for that closing message. And indeed, certainly at the Laudes Foundation, we're huge believers in the need to move towards a regenerative and inclusive built environment. And it's fantastic to hear from all of you the wonderful work your organizations are doing. Thank you so much for a very stimulating debate. There's lots of work ahead of us, I sense, but there's a fantastic sense of shared vision. And I can't think of a better group of organizations to be working with. Now, Don, back to you.
Thank you very much to John, Annika, and Mark. We cannot, of course, have this launch without talking about the Accelerator Fund and how important it is to quite literally accelerate the use of timber in the built environment. Let's go back to James, who can tell us much more.
As the Laudes Foundation and our partners help shape Built by Nature, we recognize that there are many barriers ahead of really scaling regenerative timber construction. But fortunately, there's a huge sense of energy amongst the industry frontrunners, those fantastic research institutes and others, to actually start to tackle those barriers and meaningfully provide solutions to them. So we're absolutely thrilled to today be launching Built by Nature's Accelerator Fund. This is a grant-giving fund that's there to help build the teams and build the solutions to really scale the timber building transformation. And not only that, it's there not only to unlock more timber buildings across the region, but really raise the bar in terms of the climate impact of every meter squared, ensuring that we're joining up this climate story from the forest to our buildings. For us, as a seed funder, this is about collaboration. We need to become greater than the sum of our parts. All these organizations out there driving this agenda, but also the donor community. And so this is an invitation to other climate donors to join this fund, to invest with us in unlocking the potential of this fantastic climate solution. The fund will be enabling a wide array of teams and different solutions across the region, giving out grants on a regular basis between 50 and 250,000 euros, alongside working with teams to scale up these solutions beyond initial pilots, beyond trials, to really become market-wide solutions. And we've got some fantastic example projects already launching with us as part of the fund. From the Netherlands, Holland Houtland is working to develop a new design and build process and a blended finance model, bringing in impact investors on the social and climate side to help unlock the potential of bio-based social housing in the Netherlands. From the UK, a team comprising of University College London, Waugh Thistleton Architects and Borough Happold Engineers are starting to tackle some of the myths around fire safety, starting to bring together experts and create a blueprint, a model residential building that actually tackles all of the preoccupations with fire safety and shows this new generation of buildings can meet current regulations. And from Spain, we're working with the Institute for Advanced Architecture of Catalonia, who are bringing together a network in Spain of frontrunners, of new solutions and exhibitions that are really showcasing the best of what's out there and starting to build steam in the Spanish market ahead of a major European conference in Barcelona in October 2022 that will join the forces of forests and cities together. We ask you to join us in this journey. We ask you to visit the webpage, to join our network, and to come to us with solutions to some of the wicked problems in this area that can help us embrace this new era for the building sector. Recipients of Accelerator Fund grants will join Built by Nature's growing network. We're delighted to be sharing knowledge and sharing solutions with players across the built environment, across the forestry and research space, and across Europe. Let's hear from some of the leaders who are joining us on that journey.
The climate crisis demands transformative solutions, a new economy with a net zero industry that harnesses the power of nature.
Today, the built environment produces 40% of global carbon emissions. This is our industry's greatest challenge. And with the global volume of construction set to double by 2050, resulting emissions from building materials will rise.
We need a new economy where life and not consumption becomes its true engine and purpose. A circular bioeconomy powered by nature that prospers in harmony with nature. Our forests are central to such economic transformation.
Built by Nature's vision is of a truly zero-carbon built environment that works in unison with nature. Our mission is to accelerate the timber building transformation, radically reducing embodied carbon, safely storing carbon in our building for generations, and sequestering carbon by championing forestry stewardship and regeneration.
Built by Nature will connect a network of front-runner organisations, both large and smaller, collaborating and working together on some groundbreaking products and solutions. Its ability to amplify our combined work with mass timber and the enabling funding it will offer will help our industry to scale the use of wood and increase our focus on even smarter ways to use it.
We need systemic change in the way we design, finance, incentivize, regulate and use our built environment, including innovation in business models which shift from linear to circular, allowing for the reuse and regeneration of precious materials. One critical piece of the jigsaw is to redefine our relationship with bio-based materials.
Let's reforest degraded areas on this planet that will suck up a lot of CO2 from the atmosphere, but let's do it not just once. If we cut down some of the trees and turn them into timber construction buildings, then we can do it again. We can do the trick again. I call it the forestry construction pump. So it means if you do it 4 or 5 times in a century, you can almost purify the atmosphere from carbon.
We must make urgent changes to the way we build, for people, for our cities, and for the forest economies to thrive. We don't need expensive future technologies to deliver this change. We need a modern version of one of humanity's oldest technology, timber construction. We need to build in timber, and we need to do it smarter than ever before.
Built by Nature's Network and Accelerator Fund will open a new construction market, help redefine the value our built environment can deliver, and establish a new ecosystem of actors able to scale the change we want to see. Partnerships and collaboration are fundamental to this succeeding, and we are extremely proud to work with a wide range of actors who make this change possible. The built environment has an industry-defining opportunity to reinvent itself with nature at its heart. We invite you to join us to co-create a future that is built by nature.
Well, as Leslie says at the end of our video, we at Built by Nature believe that collaboration lies at the heart of the answer to the transformative solutions a regenerative built environment requires. To achieve our goal, we have already convened a breadth of expertise to demonstrate the demand, commercial viability and scalability, aiming to stimulate further innovation and investment in timber construction by the private and public sectors and society at large. The opportunities are endless and enthusiasm is high. Together with our front-runner partners, we are already harnessing the momentum to deliver impact, innovation, and the initial green shoots of a built environment that works in unison with nature. We're delighted that you've joined us on this journey today, and we are ready to welcome you into the Built by Nature Network and Philanthropic Fund through participation, support, and close partnership. Whether you're an architect, an engineer, a developer, an investor, an owner, an insurer, a policymaker, or a broader thought leader, join us as we align to fully decarbonize the built environment and work in unison with nature so it can play its part in the climate crisis. All that's left to say is a big thank you to all our contributors, our partners and frontrunners, and thank you all for listening and being here today. Leslie, James and I are going to be at COP26 over the next fortnight, so please get in touch. You can email the team at contact@builtbn.org, and we'll arrange a cup of coffee, hot toddy even, to discuss the opportunities with Built by Nature in more detail. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again, and goodbye.